I think it has rarely been the case that the majority of people who protest are violent. And I think that what happens is we're very quick to focus on the people who are being violent. But I think that what we have to be able to do is say two things at the exact same time. It is a First Amendment right to protest. That's the first thing. But secondly, as a Christian who believes in the image of God, we should stand on behalf of the vulnerable. But at the exact same time, we have to be able to say, you can't be attacking the those electric cars. There were some images of them, like people who are attacking electric cars, and so like you can say, I see those things. It's not representative. It needs to be dealt with. And I feel like the media needs to be able to be sophisticated enough to tell a complex story. And I think that one of the things that the Trump era, we talked about it last week, it's the death of complexity. Yeah. And it's like either you are completely like pro-violence riots, or you're like completely open borders. Like there's the idea that we can say, no, let's do this compassionately and let's think these things through. I think it's often lost in the conversation. And here's something else. And I do think that in a lot of the civil rights, the current civil rights era, it feels sometimes like the church is chasing after and trying to join in with what other people are doing instead of always playing the leadership role. And when the church has the leadership role, it's able to have a stronger influence on the ethos of what's going on. But if we just say, oh, other people are marching, we're marching too, then you get caught up in their agenda and you're just kind of religious sprinkling. And so I do think that you're right. We need to have the moral clarity and leadership to say, this is what the church has to say about this issue, and this is where we differentiate ourselves from other people.
I mean, because we're following in ethic and in tactic in ways that we can't, in ways that it's just not helpful for the church too. But for some reason, our activist class in the church is really in many ways just following secular activists, and it's unfortunate.
How do any of us, but especially Christians, determine what is worthy of speaking out and when do I need to be quiet? How do I avoid sticking my head in the sand, but also not freaking out every single week?
I'll say this. I think the most explicitly political book in the Bible is the book of Revelation. The most where John is clear about the wickedness of Rome and the empire. He speaks about God's judgment on the empire. But the book of Revelation also has the most explicit depictions of the worship of the lion and the lamb. And so I think that, and there's a way in people are going to mishear this, but I want you to understand what I'm saying. Worship, when understood properly, is protest, because it shows that God is more worthy of our attention than the empire. And so there's a sense in which we need to say the empire actually, the Bible does not depict Rome and Jesus as like equal fighters where the outcome is uncertain. The Bible depicts Jesus as Lord and sovereign over all, and the empire is just one of a multitude of things that are tossed to the side on the way to the glory of God. And so what I think about it is when the empire is in between me and the worship of God, I deal with it on the way to worshiping God. And so I think that we can get stuck into an analysis and critique of empire that doesn't have its culmination in worship. Maybe that's what I want to say. If you want to talk about it, that's fine. But like, make sure that the gospel is bigger than the empire is bad. The gospel is that Jesus is king.
That's good. Justin, any thoughts there?
No, I think Esau did a really good job of talking about it. And this is, this might even sound like an argument against self-interest, being that my job is the leader of a Christian civic organization. But the truth of the matter is, as I go around the country talking about why Christians should engage and how Christians should engage, I also acknowledge that we can overdo it, right? I see a lot of Christians and churches and pastors who have made their public witness just a response to Trump. And we talked about that last week, whether it's a good one or a bad one. That should not be the center of your public witness. I should not be using Trump as an applause line every week. Yeah. Right? We can get overly political to where we are missing certain things, because Esau put it right. Some people just want to hear about Jesus sometimes. Yeah. And it's not that those issues aren't important, but if I'm in Atlanta, do I need to, everything that happens in LA, everything that happens in New York, do I need to base my sermon around that? Probably not. Sometimes I can and bring those principles and bring people into the tension between justice and moral order. But we have to be very careful, because we can become overly partisan, hyper political in a way that is taking away from the word.
So you got to think that's 52 weeks in a year, plus, in the Anglican and other traditions, Holy Week. It's like 57, 59 sermons, how many there are in a given year where you get a chance to engage people with the word of God. And think, you could spend that every single week doing this. But the other thing is, if you go and you look and you listen to the collected works and collected sermons of our key civil rights leaders and what they were preaching about when they weren't marching, every single week during the civil rights movement, people like Fred Shuttlesworth and these other people weren't preaching about Bull Connor every single week. And so I do think that we have to balance those things. Now, here's the question. It depends on your context, right? There is a sense in which after a while, the church knows where you stand.
Yeah.
And so the church kind of knows where you stand. You can kind of come in and out. But if you're in a church where it's politics is a thing that can't be touched, and your church is not from that culture, and your avoidance of that issue is what allows you to keep your job, I think there's a fearful neglect of these issues versus the principled diversity of preaching. I think you need to balance those things.